Hey everybody, here I am sitting in the truck. I'm not going to talk long. I jabbered on for like 20 minutes yesterday, and then there was some hiccup between this thing and my phone. This thing, by the way, is a Smart Mic Plus, and I like it. The sound is good, but the one big drawback for me is that it doesn't work just with the native camera app in my phone. I have to use, the Smart Mic app to record, and it's not as good as the native camera app. What to talk about? I started a book yesterday, an audio book, because the first of the month I get my new Audible credit, and I got the book The Big Sort, and I don't know the full title, but it's something to the effect of how clustering according to ideology is tearing us apart, something like that. And this is a topic I've known about for a long time. The country's getting more and more ideological. As the author describes it, you're much more likely to live in a landslide county today than you were a generation ago. Landslide county being one where, one candidate over the other, the red candidate or the blue candidate, just kicks ass, And I live in a red county. Here's the map of the 2020 election for Arkansas. The poorest parts of Arkansas are in the southeast. Not coincidentally, also the darkest, as in blackest, most African American portions are down there. And that and Little Rock are basically the only places that ever go for the Democrats. I don't know, maybe when Clinton was elected, I'm sure he took the state. But here in the northwest corner, this is the richest corner. This is where Bentonville, Arkansas, is where the corporate headquarters for the Walmart Corporation are. And also J.B. Hunt Trucking is there, Tyson Foods, what else? Walmart. One other big company is located there. So there's just loads of money flowing around up there. Not so much out here, although I am in the northwest quadrant of the state. But ultimately, I didn't think that book was going to be a very engaging listening experience. Its premise is quite easy to encapsulate. I've already given it to you. We're moving, and when we relocate, we tend to relocate to places where we feel at ease, and we tend to feel at ease in this highly charged political, socioeconomic environment with people who think like us and make about the same amount of money as we do. And so we tend to go where we feel like we fit in, and this is causing the country to become more and more Balkanized. Hopefully not literally, because shit went down in the 90s in the Balkans in a way that was really, really nasty. Like, things happened in, what's called the former Yugoslavia, that if it happened here, it would be a science fiction movie. It would be a dystopian science fiction movie. But it happened in Eastern Europe, so who cares, right? Ukraine's in Eastern Europe. Suddenly we care about Eastern Europe, but I'm not going to chase that rabbit. Anyway, I returned that book to Audible, which is a nice thing about Audible. They will rescind that privilege of being able to return any audiobook, no matter how little or how much of it you've listened to. Presumably, you can listen to the whole book and then return it and get another. I typically don't do that. In fact, I've got several titles in my Audible library that I either haven't started or I've barely listened to, but I just felt kind of like I was abusing the privilege, because there have been times when I've returned a lot of books, and so many that eventually Audible said, "Yo, you're cut off. No more returning books." But apparently it was a temporary penalty, because I'm back to being able to return books. I got rid of that, and I got Neil Ferguson's newest book. It's called Doom. And there's a longer title, which I haven't committed to memory, but boom, there it is on screen. Neil Ferguson has got many, many, many books under his belt. He's written a lot of books, and this is the first one that I've read or listened to. And there's a part of it that I really want to summarize for you, but I'm not able to do so yet. I'm reading a paper that he wrote for the Hoover Institute, which I think forms one of the chapters in his book. But I'm listening to the book as I'm drawing, and to be honest, while playing Minecraft as well. And this is the part that really appeals to me, but I just don't feel competent to summarize it yet. But he's describing three sort of mental categories into which we place catastrophes, and they can either be black swans, as described by Nicholas Nassim Taleb in The Black Swan. They can be gray rhinos, or they can be dragon kings. And a black swan is probably the most familiar concept of the three. And a black swan it's an event that, nobody saw coming. But which, after the fact, it makes total sense to us why it happened, given the context. And in fact, in hindsight, it seems obvious. A gray rhino, and this was a new concept for me when I just started this book. Gray rhino is exactly what it sounds like. We know that rhinos exist. We know that they're gray. We see one in the distance. It doesn't look like anything other than what it is. We know what it is. We know it's coming. It is a surprise to nobody. And then there is the Dragon King, which I'm least confident in speaking about. But basically, it's a big-ass disaster. It was so bad, so out of context, there's no predicting it, and its impact is almost incalculable. And a point that, and I wasn't going to describe this in this video, but here I go anyway, a point that Ferguson makes about so-called black swan events is that before they happened, they were actually gray rhinos. And, the King example, the two examples that he's comparing in the paper, which I'll link to, are World War I and the coronavirus pandemic. And both of them, when they hit, people acted like they were black swans, but lots of other people said, hey, this is a danger, this is coming. And a global pandemic in particular has been a staple of science fiction for decades, and it has been a staple of government preparedness programs, particularly in the military and the intelligence community, and also in the public health sector. For decades, people have been talking about it. People have been doing studies. People have been preparing emergency plans, and, they've been getting ready, supposedly, to deal with a pandemic when it comes along. And then coronavirus comes along, COVID-19. There are many coronaviruses, but the one that we're all interested in these days, what do they call it? SARS-CoV-19. SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome. Remember that? Back from like 2002, 2003? Anyway, supposedly, intelligent adults who get paid to do this have been doing strategic forecasting and crunching the numbers and basically making ready to deal with a pandemic when it comes along. This pandemic comes along, which is a totally nerfed pandemic. The death toll is minuscule compared to, say, the Spanish flu epidemic or pandemic, which killed millions of people toward the end of World War I. And yet this thing takes us, it knocks the whole global community on its ass. I say the whole global community. There are a few notable examples, as Ferguson points out. South Korea and Taiwan, they crushed it. They crushed this fucker. They did everything right. And, they have emerged, other than the fact that they are embedded in a global economy, which has been crushed by the pandemic, those two countries, in and of themselves, they did really well. Their death tolls were tiny. Death toll from this thing compared to a real pandemic, tiny everywhere. But even compared to places like the United States, South Korea and Taiwan got off scot-free. And it wasn't luck. They had prepared. But Ferguson's point is that a lot of times, what is a gray rhino? Like, how many movies have there been about global pandemics? We know that the possibility exists. And lots of people have given a lot of thought to what would happen if one of these things broke out in the current, globalized, high-tech context. Nobody can claim to be surprised that this has actually come about. Particularly if you want to chase the conspiracy rabbits and say that it's a bioweapon or man-made or whatever. No opinion. I'm expressing no opinion on that topic. But Ferguson's point, a lot of times what should be a gray rhino and what clearly was a gray rhino, when it actually walks right up to you and sticks its horn through your belly, magically turns into a black swan. And people say, nobody could have predicted, like 9/11. Remember Condoleezza Rice saying, nobody could have predicted that Al-Qaeda would use airplanes as missiles to fly into buildings, when the CIA had not only predicted it, but they had prepared a report on it and delivered it to the president's desk and said, hey, this is a possibility. We need to prepare for this. He looked at it like, who could have known? So, yeah, 9/11, absolutely a gray rhino. Absolutely a gray rhino until it happened. And then who could have known? Black swans, by the way, if you don't know the history of the term, for Europeans, for centuries, a swan, by definition, was white. Every swan that had ever been observed by Europeans, ever, had been white, to the point where it became the subject of, logical thought experiments. Like a black swan, before Europeans went to Australia, a black swan was an impossible thing. And then Europeans went to Australia and, oh, look at that, black swans. So, something nobody ever could have predicted until it happened. The really interesting thing about a black swan event to me is that in hindsight, it's obvious. Surely, people in the future looking back on the black swan event, they say, well, there was plenty of warning. There was plenty of context. You should have known that was coming. You should have foreseen that this was a possibility and made preparations. But, hindsight, 2020, all that good stuff. Anyway, I do not expect to be returning Doom by Neil Ferguson, because not only, like the other book that I returned, what was it? The Big Sort. The Big Sort, again, it was a premise that was very easy to spell out, and it just seemed like they were going to elaborate in painfully tedious detail, this very simple premise. Whereas Neil Ferguson's book, I'm not even sure I can encapsulate the premise. I mean, he's taking a historical look at catastrophes, and he's talking about different societal impacts and the ways that different societies anticipate and prepare and respond to catastrophes, and how, even the biggest catastrophes, they only directly affect a small portion of the population, and most of the population in responding to a catastrophe is responding vicariously to some distant person's experience. And in the current context, that means through the media, the electronic media, both legacy and social. But I mean, that's just me sort of describing what I understand of the book so far, but I'm not at all confident that I could just give you a thorough, compact synopsis of his point. I don't know what his point is yet. And I'm only, like an hour into this 20-hour book, so a couple hours maybe. Anyway, I could blather on, but I won't. I'm going to go take my laundry down off the line and fold it and put it away. I know Bitcoin's not going to jump into the shot because he's asleep on my bed in the house right now. So I'm going to go throw a big pile of laundry on top of him and start folding it. Talk to you later.